Seokjin didn't look at her. He never did. He simply held his empty crystal tumbler out to the side, a silent command for the woman in the white apron to fill it. To him, Nakira was just a pair of steady hands and a shadow in the periphery of his power. As she poured the amber liquid, the ice clinked against the glass, a sound that usually signaled his absolute control. But as the liquid settled, his gaze caught the light reflecting off her wrist. There it was. A small, jagged scar, shaped like a broken lightning bolt. It was the exact twin of the mark hidden beneath his own expensive watch, a mark from a fire that should have killed everyone in the room 20 years ago. The penthouse of the Obsidian Club sat 60 stories above the city, a glass cage for the elite. Seokjin Carey's adjusted his cufflinks, the silk of his charcoal suit whispering against his skin. He was 38, the youngest head of the Carey's syndicate, and today was his coronation. He had spent a decade scrubbing the blood off the family name, turning mafia into multinational conglomerate. He was the ghost architect, a man who rebuilt empires in the dark. Nakira Solen moved through the room like a ghost. She had worked this floor for 3 years, memorizing the way Seokjin liked his scotch, 2 cubes, 1 stir, and the way his eyes hardened when his brother entered the room. She was a service professional, a term the wealthy used to forget the humans behind the trays. "The vent is humming, Nakira," Seokjin said, his voice a low, melodic grate. He still didn't look at her. "Fix it, and bring the 1940 vintage to the boardroom. Don't be late. The investors don't like to wait on the help." He walked away, leaving her standing in the center of the opulence he claimed to own. He had no idea that Nakira wasn't just fixing the vents. She was listening. She had been listening for a very long time. The boardroom was a vacuum of silence, insulated by triple-paned glass that kept the screaming sirens of the city below at bay. Seokjin sat at the head of the table, his posture a study in calculated intimidation. Across from him sat the heads of the 3 largest shipping firms in the tri-state area. This wasn't a meeting about cargo. It was a meeting about the ghost routes, the untraceable channels through which the Carey's family had moved their influence for generations. "The transition to legal logistics is 90% complete," Seokjin stated, his eyes scanning the digital tablet in front of him. "But the final 10% requires total cooperation. If one of you flinches, the DOJ gets a roadmap to our past. I don't like roadmaps." As he spoke, the door opened silently. Nakira entered, carrying a silver tray with the vintage scotch he had requested. She moved with a rhythmic, practiced grace, placing glasses in front of men who didn't even pause their conversation to acknowledge her existence. To them, she was furniture that breathed. Seokjin watched her out of the corner of his eye. Usually her presence was a soothing constant, a sign that his world was in order. But today, the sight of that scar on her wrist was a splinter in his mind. He remembered the night of the warehouse fire, the night his father had supposedly cleaned up the loose ends of a failed partnership. A black foreman named Marcus Solen had been the scapegoat. The record said Marcus and his young daughter had perished. Coincidence, Seokjin told himself. The world is full of scars. "Nakira," he said, his voice cutting through the heavy technical talk of the shipping magnates. She paused, her hand hovering over the last glass. "Yes, Mr. Carey's. The temperature in here is 2 degrees too high. Make sure the climate control is adjusted before the afternoon session." "Of course," she replied. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor most people had when he addressed them directly. She didn't look down at the floor. She looked just past his left ear, maintaining a perfect boundary of professional distance. As she turned to leave, one of the shipping bosses, a man named Miller with a reputation for being as sloppy as he was greedy, reached out and grabbed her forearm to stop her. "Hey, sweetheart, is there any more of that smoked salmon in the lounge? This meeting is running long." Seokjin's jaw tightened. He hated lack of discipline. But more than that, he felt an instinctive, sharp jab of irritation at Miller's touch. Nakira didn't flinch. She gently disengaged her arm with a movement so fluid it looked like a dance. "I'll check for you, Mr. Miller. Although, the kitchen usually stops serving the cold appetizers at noon to ensure freshness for the lunch service." "Just get the food," Miller grumbled. When the door clicked shut, Seokjin turned back to the table, but his focus was fractured. He realized he didn't know anything about Nakira. Not where she lived, not her last name, not how she had come to work at the most exclusive club in the city. He prided himself on knowing every variable in his empire, yet here was a woman who had stood 3 feet from him for 1,000 days, and she was a total blank. "Is there a problem, Carries?" Miller asked, noticing the silence. "The problem," Seokjin said, his eyes turning cold and predatory, "is that some people think they can touch things that don't belong to them without asking. Let's get back to the roots." For the next 2 hours, they hammered out the details of the merger. But Seokjin's mind kept drifting back to the scar. 20 years ago, his father had given him a necklace, a small, silver pendant of a crane, and told him it was a gift from a friend who was going away. He had seen Marcus Solen's daughter wearing that same pendant in a photograph in his father's desk just days before the fire. He felt a sudden, cold sweat at the base of his neck. If that woman was who he thought she was, his entire clean empire was built on a foundation of ash and lies, and she had been serving him his drinks for 3 years. By 4:00 p.m., the gala preparations were in full swing. The main ballroom was being draped in white orchids, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and floor wax. Seokjin retreated to his private office, a glass-walled sanctum that overlooked the harbor. He pulled up the digital employee records for the Obsidian Club. He bypassed the manager's security and went straight to the raw data. Name, Nakira Solen. Hired May 2023. References verified. The references led to a defunct catering company in South London. He dug deeper, his fingers flying across the keys. The more he looked, the more he saw the gaps. Her social security number was valid, but it had no history prior to 10 years ago. It was a clean identity, the kind his own specialists created for high-level informants or deep-cover assets. A soft knock at the door made him close the laptop instantly. "Mr. Carries, I've adjusted the climate control, but the humming in the vent, it's not mechanical." It was Nakira. She was standing in the doorway, holding a small toolkit. It was an odd sight, a woman in a high-end maid's uniform holding a heavy-duty wrench and a screwdriver. "What do you mean, not mechanical?" Seokjin asked, rising from his chair. He walked toward her, his presence looming over her, but she didn't step back. "It's a frequency," she said quietly. "It sounds like a data burst transmitter. Someone is using the building's internal wiring to bypass your encrypted Wi-Fi. They're broadcasting everything happening in the boardroom directly to an outside source." Seokjin felt a surge of adrenaline. His security team had swept the room twice this morning. "My technicians found nothing." "Your technicians look for bugs they recognize," Nakira said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She walked past him toward the vent in the corner of his office. "They don't look for the ones that were designed by my father." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Seokjin stepped closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Your father." Nakira didn't look at him. She climbed onto a small step stool and began unscrewing the vent cover with practiced efficiency. "Marcus Solen. He was the chief engineer for your father's warehouses. He didn't just build buildings, Mr. Carries. He built secrets. He built the very ghost roots you're trying to sell today." She pulled the vent cover off and reached deep into the duct. With a sharp tug, she pulled out a small, black device no larger than a coin. It was blinking with a faint, rhythmic blue light. "He taught me that if you want to hide something from a powerful man, you put it right in front of him," she said, finally turning to look him in the eye. "Because powerful men only see what they want to see. They never see the person holding the tray." Seokjin was frozen. The shock wasn't just about the device, it was the way she looked at him. There was no hatred in her eyes. There was something much worse, pity. "You knew," he whispered. "How long have you known who I am?" "I've known since I was 8 years old and watched my father run back into a burning building to save a ledger that proved your father was a murderer," she said, her voice like cold silk. "I've been working here for 3 years because I wanted to see if the son was any different from the father. I wanted to see if you were actually building something new, or if you were just painting the walls of a prison." She handed him the device. Your brother is the one receiving the signal, by the way. He's in the penthouse suite right now, selling your legal merger to the feds in exchange for immunity. You have exactly 20 minutes before the gala starts and the warrants are signed. Seokjin looked at the device, then at the woman he had dismissed as the help. His world, his empire, his clean future, it was all disintegrating. And the only person who had warned him was the one person he had treated as invisible. "Why tell me?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why not let me fall?" Nakira stepped down from the stool, smoothing her white apron. "Because my father loved the buildings he made. He believed that even if a foundation is cracked, the structure can be saved if the architect is willing to do the hard work. I'm not doing this for you, Seokjin. I'm doing this for the name Solen. I won't let his work be used by a coward like your brother." The realization hit Seokjin like a physical blow. He wasn't just losing his business, he was losing his sense of reality. For 3 years, he had walked past this woman, barked orders at her, and treated her like a background character in the movie of his life. Meanwhile, she had been the one holding the keys to his kingdom. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice desperate. "Money, a confession." Nakira laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "I have enough money, Mr. Carries. I've been liquidating your brother's side accounts for 18 months. I'm quite wealthy, actually." Seokjin blinked. You've been embezzling from the syndicate." "I prefer to think of it as collecting back pay for my father's life," she said. She walked over to his sideboard and began preparing a drink, 2 cubes, 1 stir. She did it perfectly, without even looking. "What I want is for you to walk into that gala and tell the truth, not to the police, to the people in that room, the people who think they are untouchable." "That's suicide," Seokjin said. "If I admit the roots exist, I go to prison. The merger fails, I lose everything." "You've already lost everything," Nakira pointed out, handing him the glass. "Your brother has betrayed you. Your board is compromised. The only thing you have left is your dignity. My father died with his. Can you say the same?" She stood there, the server's uniform suddenly looking like a royal robe. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently that Seokjin felt dizzy. He looked at his hands that had never done a day of manual labor, hands that had only signed papers and held scotch. Then he looked at her hands, strong, scarred, and capable. "They won't believe me," he said. "They will if you show them the ledger," she said. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, charred USB drive. "My father didn't die in the fire. He died 10 years later in a hospital in London from complications related to smoke inhalation. He spent those 10 years digitizing every record your father tried to burn. It's all here. The bribes, the murders, the accidents." Seokjin reached for the drive, but she pulled it back. "One condition," she said. "Anything. You don't get to be the ghost architect anymore. If you survive this, you use your resources to rebuild the neighborhoods your father destroyed. You start with the Solen Foundation. You put my name on the building, and you stay out of the way." Seokjin looked at her, truly looking at her for the first time. He saw the strength in her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, and the sheer, unadulterated power of a woman who had nothing left to fear. He felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of the lies he had been carrying for a decade was finally too heavy to bear. "Why didn't you just go to the feds yourself?" he asked. "Because," she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips, "I wanted to see if you were worth saving. I wanted to see if the boy who used to share his sweets with the foreman's daughter was still in there somewhere." Seokjin froze. Memory flooded back. A hot summer day, the smell of sawdust, and a little girl with braids sitting on a pile of lumber. He had forgotten. He had buried it all under layers of prestige and authority. "Nakira," he whispered, her name finally feeling right in his mouth. "The gala starts in 10 minutes, Mr. Carries," she said, her voice returning to its professional, neutral tone. "The vintage scotch is waiting. Will you be joining us, or should I tell the guests you've been delayed?" She turned and walked toward the door, the silver tray tucked under her arm. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She knew exactly what he was going to do. Seokjin picked up the charcoal suit jacket he had thrown on the chair. He looked at himself in the mirror, the tattoos on his neck, the sharp lines of his face. He looked like a king. But as he followed Nakira out of the office, he knew he was just a man following a leader. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Club was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain from the vaulted ceilings, casting a fractured light over the 300 guests who represented the pulsing heart of the city's old money and new power. Seokjin stood at the mahogany podium, the weight of the charred USB drive in his pocket feeling heavier than a lead ingot. To his right, his younger brother, Sang-hoon, leaned against a marble pillar, sipping champagne with a smirk that suggested he already owned the room. Sang-hoon was everything Seokjin had tried not to be: loud, impulsive, and convinced that the family's history was a weapon, not a stain. Seokjin scanned the perimeter. He saw the security detail, men he had hired, men he had trusted, adjusting their earpieces. He knew now that half of them were on Sang-hoon's payroll. He looked for Nakira. She was positioned near the primary exit, a silver tray balanced on her fingertips, her expression as unreadable as a desert horizon. She didn't offer a nod. She didn't offer encouragement. She simply existed, a silent witness to the choice he was about to make. "Distinguished guests," Seokjin began, his voice amplified by the hidden speakers. The hum of conversation died instantly. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of a merger, a transition from the shadows into the light. We call ourselves architects of the future. He paused, his eyes locking onto Sang-hoon. His brother's smirk faltered just a fraction. "But you cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation of hollow bones," Seokjin continued. "For years, the Carey's name has stood for order. But that order was bought with the silence of better men, men like Marcus Solen." A ripple of confused murmurs washed over the crowd. The shipping magnates in the front row exchanged panicked glances. Miller, the man who had touched Nakira's arm earlier, turned pale. 20 years ago, a fire destroyed the Solen legacy to protect a ledger, Seokjin said, his hand reaching into his pocket. "I was told that fire was an accident. I was told the past was dead. I was lied to." He held up the USB drive. "This contains the digital ghost of every crime committed to build this club, every bribe paid to the men in this room, every accident that cleared the way for your profits." Sang-hoon moved. He didn't shout, he signaled. 2 security guards stepped toward the podium, but before they could reach the stairs, Nakira moved. She didn't use a weapon. She didn't scream. She simply stepped into the path of the lead guard, her tray tilted at a precise angle. As the guard tried to brush past her, she let the heavy crystal glasses slide. The sound of shattering glass was like a gunshot in the silent room. The guard stumbled, his foot catching on the slick floor, and in that second of chaos, Nakira looked directly at the man. "Watch your step, Mr. Vane," she said, her voice carrying through the sudden stillness. "The floor is thinner than you think." The guard froze. It wasn't the broken glass that stopped him. It was the fact that she knew his name. The help wasn't supposed to know names. Seokjin didn't wait. He plugged the drive into the podium's media port. Behind him, the massive 4K display, intended to show promotional renders of the new shipping terminals, flickered to life. Instead of blueprints, a grainy, scanned document appeared. It was a payroll sheet from 2006, signed by Seokjin's father, detailing a disposal fee for the Solen warehouse. "The truth is out," Seokjin said, looking at the cameras of the social media influencers and journalists in the room. "And the architect is stepping down." The aftermath was not a riot, it was an exodus. The wealthy don't stay for the explosion, they flee at the first scent of smoke. Within 10 minutes, the ballroom was a graveyard of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres and discarded silk wraps. The police sirens were already wailing in the distance, a low, mournful sound echoing off the skyscrapers. Seokjin sat on the edge of the podium, his charcoal jacket discarded on the floor. He looked at his neck tattoos in the reflection of a spilled wine puddle. He had spent his life trying to be a king, only to realize he was a warden of a prison his father had built. Sang-hoon was gone, likely fleeing toward the private helipad, but Seokjin knew he wouldn't get far. Nakira had already mentioned she had been draining the site accounts. The ghost architect's brother was about to find out that his escape plan had been defunded by a waitress. You look smaller without the podium, a voice said. He looked up. Nakira was standing there, her white apron stained with the wine she had spilled to protect him. She wasn't holding a tray anymore. Her hands were tucked into her pockets, her posture relaxed for the first time in 3 years. I feel smaller, Seokjin admitted. What happens now, Nakira? You have the files, you have the money, you have the revenge you waited 20 years for. I told you, she said, walking toward him. It wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a circle. I wanted a line. I wanted the story to finally go somewhere else. She sat down on the steps next to him. For a moment, they weren't a mafia boss and a servant. They were just two people sitting in the wreckage of a lie. The feds will be here in 5 minutes, Seokjin said. I'm going to prison. Even with the whistleblower protection, I'm the face of the organization. I'm the one who signed the recent mergers. Probably, Nakira said. But you'll go in as a man who chose to be human. That's more than your father ever did. And when you come out, the Solen Foundation will be waiting. I've already filed the incorporation papers. You're listed as the primary consultant for the urban renewal projects. Pro bono, of course. Seokjin laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You've thought of everything. I had 3 years of standing in the corner of your office, she reminded him. You'd be surprised how much a person can plan when they are treated like a piece of the wall. I know your supply chains, your legal loopholes, and your favorite brand of ink. I didn't just watch you, Seokjin. I studied you. He turned to her, a genuine curiosity breaking through his shock. Why me? Why didn't you just take the money and disappear to Europe? You could have lived 1,000 lives with what you took from Sanghoon. Nakira looked out at the city's skyline. Because my father believed in the ghost architect. He used to tell me that the man who understands how a building breathes is the only one who can keep it from collapsing. I saw you trying to change things, even if you were doing it the wrong way. I didn't want to destroy the building. I just wanted to fire the owner. The elevator doors at the back of the room hissed open. A dozen tactical officers in FBI jackets swarmed the floor, their boots thudding against the polished wood. Seokjin stood up, smoothing his black shirt. He looked at Nakira one last time. You're a better architect than I ever was. I know, she said quietly. She stood up, adjusted her collar, and walked toward the kitchen entrance. As the officers surrounded Seokjin, she didn't look back. She had a new empire to build, and for the first time in her life, she was going to be the one whose name was on the door. The Federal Detention Center was a world of gray concrete and fluorescent light, a stark contrast to the velvet and gold of the Obsidian Club. Seokjin had spent 6 months awaiting trial. His lawyers were expensive, but his cooperation was total. He gave them everything, the names, the routes, the accounts. He watched as the Carey's empire was dismantled brick by brick. But every Tuesday, a manila envelope arrived. It contained no letters, only photographs. The first photograph was of an empty lot in the center of the city's most neglected district, the place where the Solen warehouse had once stood. The second was of a groundbreaking ceremony. There was Nakira, wearing a hard hat instead of a maid's cap, standing next to the mayor. She wasn't smiling for the cameras, she was looking at the blueprints. Seokjin realized that while he was paying for the past, she was building the future. She had taken the blood money he had tried so hard to clean and was actually using it to scrub the streets. One afternoon, he was called to the visitor's room. He expected his attorney. Instead, he found Nakira sitting behind the plexiglass. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a sharp, tailored blazer, charcoal, the same color he used to favor. You look well, she said, her voice echoing through the small speaker. The food is better than the obsidian, ironically, Seokjin joked, though his eyes were tired. Why are you here, Nakira? You should be far away from anything with the name Carey's on it. The name Carey's is gone, she said. The assets have been seized, the accounts closed. But I found something in my father's old digital safe, something I didn't see before. She held a document up to the glass. It was a deed of trust, dated the day before the fire. My father didn't just build the warehouses for your father, she said. He owned 40% of the land they sat on. Your father didn't kill him just to hide a ledger. He killed him to steal the dirt. Seok-jin closed his eyes. The depth of his father's depravity seemed to have no bottom. I'm sorry. I know it means nothing now, but I'm sorry. It means something now because I'm giving it back, she said. The Solen Foundation is now the legal owner of the Obsidian Club's land. I'm turning the penthouse into a vocational school, the Ghost Architect School of Engineering. Seok-jin felt a lump in his throat. I don't deserve to have my name on anything you build. It's not for you, she said, her voice firm. It's for the next boy who thinks the only way to be powerful is to be feared. It's to show them that the person serving the tea might be the one who owns the floor they're standing on. She rose to leave. Nakira, he called out. She paused. Why did you keep the scar? You have the money now. You could have it removed, lasered away. She looked down at her wrist, at the jagged lightning bolt that matched his own. Because, she said, her eyes meeting his with a terrifying clarity, I never want to forget the moment I realized that the most powerful man in the room was actually the most blind. It's a reminder to keep my eyes open. She walked out of the room, her stride confident and rhythmic. Seok-jin watched her go, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at a shadow or a servant. He was looking at his equal. And in the silence of his cell, he finally understood. True power isn't about who you can command, it's about who you can no longer ignore. The transition from a cell to the sidewalk is a violent kind of quiet. When Seok-jin was released 2 years later, his sentence reduced for his cooperation in dismantling the tri-state's most entrenched syndicate, he expected the world to feel smaller. Instead, the city felt like a blueprint he no longer knew how to read. He stood on the curb outside the correctional facility with nothing but a gray duffel bag and a bus pass. No charcoal suits. No tailored silk. Just a man whose name was a footnote in a scandal. He spent his first night in a halfway house, listening to the sirens he used to ignore from 60 stories up. He thought about the Ghost Architect title. It was a joke now. He had spent his life building walls to keep people out, only to find himself trapped behind them. The next morning, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the armored transport he was used to. It was a modest, electric vehicle. The driver didn't get out. The window rolled down halfway, revealing a pair of steady, dark eyes. The bus is late, Nakira said. Seok-jin didn't hesitate. He climbed into the passenger seat, the scent of the car, cedar and old paper, reminding him of the library in the Solen Foundation's new headquarters. You have a habit of showing up when I'm at my lowest, Nakira. It's the best time to see if the foundation is holding, she replied, pulling into traffic. She didn't take him to a hotel or a safe house. She took him to the construction site of the Solen Vocational School. The building was a marvel of glass and reclaimed timber, rising like a phoenix from the lot where her father had once worked. It was modern, transparent, and defiant. I have a problem, she said as they stepped onto the site. She handed him a hard hat. The HVAC system in the East Wing is humming. My engineers say it's the vibration of the city transit line. I think they're wrong. Seok-jin looked at the blueprints spread out on a makeshift table. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine interest. He traced the lines of the ductwork, his mind working through the physics of the airflow. He realized she wasn't asking for help. She was giving him a purpose. It's not the transit line, he said after a moment. It's the intake. You've used a circular vent in a square cavity. It's creating a vortex. It sounds like a whistle because the building is trying to breathe through a straw. Nakira leaned against the table, watching him. Can you fix it? I can redesign the baffle, he said, but I don't have the authority to sign off on the change. You do now, she said, sliding a badge across the table. It didn't say owner. It didn't say boss. It said, Seok-jin carries site consultant. People will talk, Seok-jin warned. The daughter of Marcus Solen hearing the son of the man who killed him, the board will call it a scandal. Let them talk, she said, her voice like iron. I'm not hearing your father's son. I'm hearing the man who stood at a podium and chose the truth over a kingdom. And besides, I own the board. I fired everyone who disagreed with me 3 months ago. Seok-jin looked at the badge, then at the woman who had transformed from a shadow into the sun. He realized that this was the justice she had been seeking. It wasn't about blood. It was about reclaiming the work. She was making him build the very things his family had destroyed. While Seokjin was rebuilding, the ghosts of the past weren't entirely laid to rest. Sang-hoon, his younger brother, had been a fugitive for 2 years, hiding in the lawless crevices of overseas tax havens. But desperation has a way of bringing men home. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. Seokjin was finishing the adjustments to the east wing vents when he felt a cold draft that didn't come from the HVAC system. He turned to find Sang-hoon standing in the shadows of the unfinished hallway. His brother looked haggard, his expensive clothes replaced by a nondescript tracksuit, his eyes wild with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. "You look like a common laborer, Jin," Sang-hoon spat, stepping into the light of a work lamp. "The great ghost architect, fixing pipes for a waitress. It's pathetic." "I'm building something, Sang-hoon," Seokjin said, keeping his voice calm. He didn't reach for a weapon, he didn't have one. "Something that doesn't require a body count. You should try it." "I'm not here for a lecture," Sang-hoon hissed. "I need the access codes to the offshore reserve, the ones only you have. The feds froze everything else. Give them to me and I disappear. I'll never bother you or your waitress again." "The money is gone," Seokjin said. "I gave the codes to Nakira a year ago. She used it to fund the scholarships for this school. There is no reserve, Sang-hoon. There is only work." Sang-hoon pulled a small, silver pistol from his pocket. His hand was shaking. "You gave it to her, our father's legacy. You handed it to the help." "She wasn't the help," Seokjin said, stepping toward his brother, unafraid. "She was the owner. We were just the squatters who made a mess of the place." "I'll kill you," Sang-hoon whimpered. "I'll kill both of you." "Then do it," a voice rang out from the end of the hall. Nakira walked into the light. She didn't have a gun. She had her phone in her hand, the screen glowing. "I've been recording since you stepped onto the property, Sang-hoon. The police are 4 minutes away. You can pull that trigger, but it won't buy you a ticket out of here. It'll just ensure you never see the sun again." Sang-hoon looked between his brother and the woman who had dismantled his life. He saw the unity between them, a bond forged in the fire he had tried to ignore. He realized he was the only one still living in the old world. The power had shifted so completely that his gun felt like a toy. With a sob of frustration, Sang-hoon dropped the weapon. He collapsed onto the concrete floor, weeping for the empire of shadows that had finally evaporated. Nakira didn't mock him. She didn't celebrate. She simply picked up the gun, cleared the chamber with the efficiency of someone who had learned every secret of the trade, and waited for the sirens. She looked at Seokjin, a silent communication passing between them. They had finally closed the book on the Carey's syndicate. The opening ceremony for the Solen Center for Urban Engineering was unlike any gala the Obsidian Club had ever hosted. There were no velvet ropes. There were no VIP sections. The room was filled with neighborhood kids, local contractors, and the families of the men who had once been invisible to the city's elite. Seokjin stood in the back, leaning against a pillar. He preferred the shadows now, not because he was hiding, but because he liked to watch the way the light hit the glass he had helped install. He wore a simple navy blazer, his neck tattoos partially visible, a reminder of where he had come from, but no longer a definition of where he was going. Nakira took the stage. She looked radiant, her presence commanding the room with an ease that made people forget she had ever carried a tray. "Many people ask me why I built this," she said into the microphone. "They ask why I didn't just take my inheritance and go. But an inheritance isn't just money. It's a responsibility. My father, Marcus Solen, believed that a building is only as strong as the respect given to the people who lay the bricks." She looked toward the back of the room, her eyes finding Seokjin. "I want to thank my lead consultant," she said. "A man who taught me that even the most damaged structure can be reinforced. He showed me that the greatest power isn't in owning the room, it's in being brave enough to change the floor." The applause was genuine, a warm wave of sound that filled the atrium. After the speeches, the crowd moved toward the buffet. Seokjin began to walk toward the exit, his work for the day done. Leaving so soon. He turned. Nakira was standing there, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. She handed one to him. "I have a new project," she said, her eyes twinkling with a touch of that familiar wit. "There's an old warehouse district in the south. It's been abandoned for 30 years. I want to turn it into a sustainable housing complex. But the foundation is tricky. It's built on marshland." Seokjin took a sip of the cider. He looked at her, the woman who had once been his shadow and was now his partner in rebuilding a city. "Marshland is difficult," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "It requires a very specific kind of piling. You need someone who knows how to dig deep without disturbing the surrounding earth." "I know," she said, clinking her glass against his. "That's why I'm asking the best architect I know." They stood there for a moment, looking out at the city they were no longer trying to rule, but finally trying to serve. The clink of the glass didn't signify a command this time. It signified a beginning. Seokjin looked at his wrist, then at hers. The scars were still there, identical and jagged. They were no longer marks of a tragedy. They were the serial numbers of their survival. "2 cubes, 1 stir," she teased, nodding toward his glass. "No," Seokjin said, his voice firm and filled with a new kind of peace. "Just the truth. It's much easier to swallow." As they walked out of the building together, the city's skyline glittered before them, not as a kingdom to be conquered, but as a blueprint to be rewritten. The ghost architect had finally stepped out of the shadows, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the light.